In the marble corridors of power, where loyalty is currency and silence is survival, one man's conscience would shatter centuries of tradition. When duty collides with justice, and a single question threatens to expose the darkest secrets of the crown,
a man who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one trying to break into the palace, it's the one already living inside.
What happens when the very people you've sworn to protect become the ones you must protect others from? In a world where questioning orders could mean treason, one royal guard's moment of doubt would ignite a chain of events that would shake the foundation of the monarchy itself. This is the story of Captain James Whitmore, a man who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one trying to break into the palace, it's the one already living inside it. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Kensington Palace like secrets refusing to be revealed. Captain James Whitmore adjusted his ceremonial sword as he walked the familiar corridors, his polished boots echoing against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. At 42, he had served the crown for nearly 2 decades, rising through the ranks with unwavering dedication and in spotless record. His loyalty had never been questioned, his orders never disobeyed, until today. The summons had come at dawn, delivered by a nervous young page who wouldn't meet his eyes. Her Royal Highness requests your immediate presence in the blue drawing room. The boy had stammered before scurrying away like a mouse fleeing a cat. James had dressed quickly in his formal uniform, the red tunic with its gold braiding that marked him as one of the elite personal protection officers. Whatever Camilla wanted at this early hour, it was clearly urgent. The blue drawing room was bathed in pale morning light filtering through tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Queen Camilla stood with her back to the door, her perfectly coiffed hair catching the light as she gazed out at the manicured lawns. She wore a deep navy dress that emphasized her regal bearing, every inch the sovereign she had become. The room itself spoke of power and tradition. Oil paintings of long-dead monarchs lined the walls, their eyes seeming to watch and judge from their gilded frames. "Your Majesty," James said, bowing precisely as protocol demanded. "You requested my presence?" Camilla turned slowly, her face composed, but her eyes holding something James couldn't quite identify. Anger? Fear, perhaps both. "Captain Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority he had grown accustomed to over the years. "Thank you for coming so promptly. I have a matter of utmost delicacy to discuss with you." She moved to the ornate desk that dominated one corner of the room, her fingers trailing along its polished surface. James remained at attention, waiting. In all his years of service, he had learned that patience was often the most valuable skill a guard could possess. Royal conversations rarely followed straight paths. "There has been an incident," Camilla continued, not looking at him directly, "something that could potentially damage the reputation of the crown if it were to become public knowledge. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining the dignity and honor of the royal family." "Of course, Your Majesty," James replied without hesitation. It was a fundamental principle that had been drilled into him from his first day of training. The crown's reputation was paramount, to be protected at all costs. Camilla's fingers drummed once against the desk before she turned to face him fully. "Princess Charlotte has been involved in something rather unfortunate. She has made certain statements, engaged in certain behaviors that could be misinterpreted by the press and the public. In her youthful naivety, she has failed to consider the broader implications of her actions." James felt a slight tension in his shoulders. Princess Charlotte was barely 16, King Charles's granddaughter, who had always seemed to him to be a bright-spirited young woman with a genuine care for others. He had been present at numerous family gatherings where her intelligence and compassion had been evident to all who encountered her. "What kind of statements, Your Majesty?" he asked carefully. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. "What to me," he said. "The specifics are not your concern, Captain. What matters is that she has been making wild accusations, spreading rumors that could destabilize public confidence in the monarchy. She claims to have witnessed something that she clearly misunderstood, and she has been quite vocal about it with members of the household staff." The Queen Consort moved to the window again, her posture rigid. "I have tried to reason with her, to help her understand that sometimes what we think we see is not what actually occurred. Young people often let their imaginations run wild, especially when they're under stress. But she remains stubborn." James waited for her to continue, a growing unease settling in his stomach. He had worked protective detail for Princess Charlotte on several occasions, and had never known her to be given to flights of fancy or dramatic exaggeration. If anything, she was remarkably level-headed for someone her age. "Therefore," Camilla said, turning back to him with a decisive air, I am ordering you to detain Princess Charlotte until this matter can be properly resolved. She is to be confined to the Rose Tower for her own safety and for the protection of the crown. She is not to have contact with anyone outside of essential power staff, and even then, only under strict supervision. The words hit James like a physical blow. Detain? Confine? These were terms associated with criminals and enemies of the state, not with teenage members of the royal family. He stared at Camilla, wondering if he had somehow misunderstood her meaning. "I beg your pardon, Your Majesty," he said slowly, "but did you say detain the princess?" "That is correct." Camilla's voice was flat, businesslike. "She is to be placed under house arrest until further notice. I am relying on your discretion and loyalty in this matter, Captain. This directive comes with the full authority of the Crown." James felt the world shift slightly beneath his feet. In 20 years of service, he had never been asked to detain a member of the royal family. His role was to protect them, to serve as their shield against external threats. The idea of Princess Charlotte as a threat to be contained, rather than a person to be protected, went against every instinct he possessed. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "might I ask what specific threat the princess poses that requires such drastic measures? If there are security concerns, perhaps there are alternative approaches we might consider." Camilla's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I am not in the habit of having my orders questioned, Captain Whitmore. The princess has become a liability, and liabilities must be contained. That is all you need to know." But it wasn't all James needed to know. Every fiber of his being was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. Princess Charlotte was a child, a member of the family he had sworn to protect. The idea of imprisoning her in the Rose Tower, a section of the palace that hadn't been used for residential purposes in decades, felt like a betrayal of everything he had pledged to uphold. "The Rose Tower has been unoccupied for years, Your Majesty," he said, grasping for practical objections. "It would need to be prepared, heated, properly furnished." "Those arrangements have already been made," Camilla cut him off. "Your only concern is ensuring that the princess is transported there safely and that she remains there until I give you further instructions. Is that understood?" James stood in silence for a long moment, his mind racing. The Rose Tower was isolated, cut off from the main palace complex. It had thick walls and few windows, originally built as a defensive structure in the palace's earliest days. To confine anyone there, especially a young girl, seemed cruel beyond measure. "Captain Whitmore," Camilla's voice carried a warning edge, "I am waiting for your acknowledgement of these orders." James looked into her eyes and saw something there that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't the protective concern of a step-grandmother worried about a troubled teenager. This was the cold calculation of someone eliminating a problem. The realization struck him with the force of a lightning bolt. Princess Charlotte wasn't being protected. She was being silenced. "Your Majesty," he heard himself say, the words coming out before he could stop them. What exactly did Princess Charlotte witness? The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla's face went completely still, her eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. In that moment, James understood that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. But the question hung in the air between them like a sword, and he found that he didn't regret asking it, because sometimes the most important questions were the ones that no one wanted to answer. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to dim as Queen Camilla took a step toward him, her presence suddenly radiating a cold authority that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. James had served under difficult commanders before, had faced down armed intruders, and dealt with threats to royal security that would have terrified ordinary citizens. But in this moment, facing the woman who held the power to destroy his career with a single word, he felt a fear unlike any he had experienced before. Not fear for his own safety, but fear for what his silence might enable. "Captain," Camilla said, her voice soft but laden with menace, "I believe you may have forgotten your place." The weight of Camilla's stare pressed down on James like a physical force, but he found himself unable to look away. 20 years of military discipline warred with a growing conviction that something terrible was being covered up, and Princess Charlotte was the only witness who could expose it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and consequences. "I have not forgotten my place, Your Majesty," James said finally, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "My place is to protect members of the royal family from harm. All members." Camilla's laugh was sharp and humorless. "How noble of you, Captain. But you seem to be confused about where the real threat lies." Princess Charlotte's wild stories pose a danger to the stability of the crown itself. Sometimes protection requires difficult decisions. She moved closer, her eyes never leaving his face. I wonder if you truly understand what you're risking with your questions. Your career, your pension, your reputation, all of it hangs in the balance. And for what? A teenage girl's overactive imagination? But James was thinking about the Princess Charlotte he knew, the young woman who volunteered at homeless shelters without media fanfare, who remembered the names of every palace staff member's children, who had once spent an entire afternoon sitting with an elderly kitchen worker who was grieving her husband's death. Whatever she had witnessed, whatever she was trying to tell people about, it wasn't the product of an overactive imagination. What did she see? He asked again, more firmly this time. Camilla's composure cracked for just an instant, and in that brief moment, James caught a glimpse of something that confirmed his worst fears. Panic, guilt. The look of someone desperately trying to keep a devastating secret buried. She thinks she saw something that didn't happen, Camilla said quickly. She was confused, perhaps traumatized by what she thought she witnessed. Sometimes young minds create false memories to cope with stress. What kind of trauma? James pressed. Your Majesty, if the princess has been traumatized, she needs help, not imprisonment. She needs to be kept quiet. The words exploded out of Camilla before she could stop them, revealing far more than she had intended. Her face flushed red as she realized what she had said, and James felt another piece of the puzzle fall into place. Kept quiet about what? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Camilla turned away from him, moving to the window with quick, agitated steps. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled, but James could hear the underlying desperation. There are forces at work here that you cannot possibly understand, Captain. Political considerations, international relationships, matters of state that go far beyond your security clearance. Sometimes the crown must make sacrifices for the greater good. Since when is a 16-year-old girl's freedom considered an acceptable sacrifice? James asked, the words coming out harsher than he had intended. The queen consort whirled around, her eyes blazing. Since that 16-year-old girl refuses to understand that her accusations could destroy everything we have worked to build, she claims to have seen things that would create an international incident, that could topple governments and destroy alliances that have taken decades to forge. There it was, the admission James had been waiting for. Princess Charlotte hadn't imagined anything. She had witnessed something real, something so damaging that powerful people were willing to imprison a child to keep it secret. What did she see? He asked for the third time, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made Camilla pause. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the elegant room. Outside, James could hear the distant sounds of London awakening. Traffic, voices, the normal rhythm of life continuing while this extraordinary confrontation played out within the palace walls. He thought about all the ordinary people going about their daily lives, trusting that their institutions would protect them, that their leaders would act with honor and integrity. You really want to know? Camilla asked finally, her voice hollow. You want to understand why that girl must be silenced? James nodded, though part of him dreaded what he was about to hear. Camilla moved to her desk and opened a drawer, withdrawing a tablet computer. She activated the screen and turned it toward him. 3 nights ago, there was a private meeting in the Gold State Room. A delegation from Moldavia was here to discuss a very lucrative arms deal, weapons that would be manufactured in Britain and sold to Moldavia's military. The contract would have been worth billions to the British economy. James looked at the screen, which showed what appeared to be security camera footage of the Gold State Room. He could see several figures in formal attire seated around a conference table, but the image quality was poor and he couldn't make out specific details. The negotiations were delicate, Camilla continued. Moldavia has been dealing with internal conflicts, and there were questions about how these weapons might be used. But the economic benefits to Britain were too significant to ignore. Sometimes diplomacy requires us to overlook certain moral complexities. She touched the screen, and the video began to play. James watched as the figures moved around the table, appearing to be engaged in animated discussion. But what caught his attention was a timestamp in the corner that showed this footage was from 11:30 p.m., well past the time when any member of the royal family should have been in that part of the palace. Princess Charlotte was not supposed to be anywhere near this meeting, Camilla said, her voice tight with frustration. She was supposed to be in her quarters, asleep, but apparently she had been reading in the palace library and was returning to her room when she heard voices from the Gold State Room. The video quality was too poor for James to see exactly what was happening, but he could make out what appeared to be documents being passed back and forth across the table. What exactly did she witness? James asked, though he was beginning to form his own conclusions. Camilla hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She saw the Moldavian delegation presenting documentation that showed how the weapons would be used to suppress civilian uprisings. Videos of government forces firing on peaceful protesters, plans for establishing military control over entire regions, evidence that the arms deal was essentially funding a campaign of systematic oppression. James felt his blood run cold. Britain selling weapons to a regime that would use them against its own people was bad enough, but the fact that the royal family was apparently involved in facilitating such a deal was almost unthinkable. And Princess Charlotte witnessed this evidence being presented? He asked. She did more than witness it, Camilla said bitterly. She used her phone to record portions of the meeting. She has video evidence of British officials reviewing documentation of human rights abuses and deciding to proceed with the arms deal anyway. She has recordings of discussions about how to hide the true nature of the arrangement from Parliament and the public. The full scope of the situation hit James like a physical blow. Princess Charlotte hadn't just stumbled upon some minor indiscretion. She had evidence of what amounted to complicity in war crimes. Evidence that would destroy not just careers but could potentially bring down the government itself. She's been trying to get someone to listen to her, Camilla continued. First she approached her private secretary, then some of the household staff. She's convinced that she has a moral obligation to expose what she witnessed. She doesn't understand the complexity of international relations, the delicate balance that must be maintained. She understands right from wrong, James said quietly. Something that seems to be in short supply in this palace. Camilla's eyes flashed dangerously. How dare you? Do you think this decision was made lightly? Do you think we don't understand the moral implications? Sometimes leaders must make choices that ordinary people cannot comprehend. The stability of nations, the preservation of alliances, the protection of economic interests, these considerations must outweigh individual moral qualms. Even when those moral qualms involve watching innocent people die? James asked. Those people were going to die whether we sold weapons to Moldavia or not, Camilla snapped. At least this way, British workers keep their jobs. British companies remain competitive in the global marketplace, and Britain maintains its influence in a strategically important region. Princess Charlotte sees only the immediate moral question. She cannot see the larger picture. James studied the woman before him, realizing that he was looking at someone who had convinced herself that complicity in atrocity was justifiable as long as it served her nation's interests. The rationalization was complete, the moral blindness total. So your solution is to imprison her, he said. My solution is to give her time to mature, to understand that the world is more complicated than her teenage idealism suggests. She will be comfortable in the Rose Tower, well cared for, but unable to cause damage with her naive crusading. Eventually, she will come to see that silence serves the greater good. And if she doesn't? The question hung in the air for a long moment before Camilla answered. Then she will remain in the Rose Tower until she does. Or until the Moldavian situation is resolved and her evidence becomes irrelevant. How long could that take? James asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Years, if necessary. The casual way she said it, as if consigning a 16-year-old girl to imprisonment for years was merely an administrative detail, made James's stomach turn. He realized that he was witnessing the face of power without conscience, authority without humanity. I cannot do this, he said finally. I cannot and will not detain Princess Charlotte. Camilla's face went completely cold. Then you will be relieved of duty immediately, and I will find someone who understands the importance of following orders. James nodded slowly, understanding that his career in royal protection was over. But as he looked at the woman before him, he realized that some things mattered more than careers, more than pensions, more than the comfortable life he had built through decades of loyal service. Your Majesty, he said formally, I hereby resign my commission as captain of the Royal Protection Unit. The shock on Camilla's face was evident, but James was already turning toward the door. He had a 16-year-old princess to protect and very little time to figure out how to do it. James strode through the palace corridors with purposeful steps, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. His resignation wouldn't become official for several hours, giving him a narrow window of opportunity before other guards would be ordered to detain both him and Princess Charlotte. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, but beneath the fear and uncertainty he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the crystal-clear certainty that he was doing the right thing. He knew Princess Charlotte's daily routine by heart. At this time of morning, she would likely be in the small breakfast room adjacent to her private quarters, probably reading while she ate. The princess had always been an early riser, preferring the quiet morning hours for study and reflection. It was a trait that had served her well academically, but today, it might be the thing that saved her life. As he approached her wing of the palace, James noticed an unusual number of security personnel in the corridors. They weren't his usual team. These were men he recognized as belonging to the palace's internal security division, the unit responsible for handling sensitive matters that regular protection officers weren't cleared to know about. Camilla was already putting her contingency plan into motion. He found Princess Charlotte exactly where he expected her to be, seated by a tall window with a cup of tea and what appeared to be a history textbook. She was still in her nightgown and robe, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. When she looked up and saw him, her face brightened with the warm smile that had charmed the British public since she was a small child. "Captain Whitmore," she said, setting down her book. "You're up early today. Is everything all right?" James closed the door behind him and quickly checked the small sitting area to ensure they were alone. When he turned back to Princess Charlotte, his expression was grave enough that her smile faded immediately. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are in immediate danger, and we have very little time." The princess set down her teacup with trembling hands, her eyes wide with sudden fear. "What kind of danger? What's happening?"
"Queen Camilla has ordered me to detain you."
"You are to be imprisoned in the Rose Tower indefinitely, until you agree to remain silent about what you witnessed 3 nights ago in the Gold State Room." The color drained from Charlotte's face. "She knows about that? But I haven't told anyone important yet." "I was trying to decide how to handle it properly." "She knows," James confirmed. "And she's decided that the best way to handle it is to make sure you can never speak about it again. Your Royal Highness, I need you to understand something. I have just resigned my commission rather than follow that order. But there are other officers who will not hesitate to carry out those instructions." Princess Charlotte stood up abruptly, wrapping her robe more tightly around herself. "Captain, what I saw..." "Those people in that meeting were planning to sell weapons to monsters. The videos they showed of what the Moldavian military has done to protesters, to civilians. It was horrible. Children were being killed. How can they just ignore that? They can ignore it because they've convinced themselves that British interests matter more than Moldavian lives," James said bluntly. "But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is getting you somewhere safe before they come for you. Where can we go?" "This is a palace, Captain. There's nowhere to hide here." James had been thinking about that exact problem during his walk through the corridors. The palace was enormous, with hundreds of rooms, hidden passages, and service areas that most people knew nothing about. But it was also one of the most monitored buildings in Britain, with security cameras and motion detectors covering every significant space. Hiding within the palace walls would only buy them time, not true safety. "We're not staying in the palace," he said. "We're leaving now." "Leaving? But, Captain, I can't just disappear. My family will be worried. The media will notice. Your family is the one trying to imprison you," James reminded her gently. "And as for the media, Camilla will have a story ready. You're feeling unwell. You're taking a brief retreat for your mental health. You're studying abroad, privately. They'll buy whatever explanation she gives them, at least for a while." Princess Charlotte sank back into her chair, the full weight of her situation finally hitting her. "My own family wants to lock me away rather than face the truth about what they're doing." "Not your entire family," James said. "I don't believe your grandfather or your father know about any of this. But Camilla has significant influence, and she's clearly willing to use it to protect this arms deal." The princess was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the gardens where she had played as a child. When she spoke again, her voice was small but determined. "What happens if we run? Where do we go? How do we live?" "I don't know yet," James admitted, "but I do know that we have to try. Because the alternative is watching you disappear into that tower until you break, until you agree to pretend that innocent people's lives don't matter." "Captain," Princess Charlotte said, looking up at him with eyes that seemed far older than her 16 years. "Why are you doing this? You're risking everything for me. Your career, your pension, probably your freedom if they catch us." James considered the question for a moment, thinking about all the years he had served the crown without question, all the times he had followed orders because following orders was what soldiers did. But there came a time when blind obedience became complicity, when silence became betrayal of everything a person claimed to believe in. Because 20 years ago, I swore an oath to protect the royal family, he said finally. And that includes protecting them from each other when necessary. What Camilla's planning to do to you is wrong, Your Royal Highness. It's a betrayal of everything the monarchy is supposed to represent. Princess Charlotte stood up again, this time with resolution rather than fear.
What do you need me to do?
First, get dressed quickly. Warm clothes, comfortable shoes. Bring your phone and any money you might have, but nothing else. We need to move fast and light. As the princess hurried toward her bedroom, James used his security clearance to access the palace's internal monitoring system one last time. The guards were already moving toward Charlotte's wing, but they were being cautious, probably expecting to find her still asleep. That gave them perhaps 10 minutes before the net closed around them. Princess Charlotte emerged from her room in dark jeans, boots, and a heavy sweater, her phone tucked into her pocket along with what appeared to be several £100s in cash. "I'm ready," she said, though James could see her hands shaking slightly. "Your Royal Highness," James said as they prepared to leave, "once we walk out that door, there's no going back. You'll be giving up your life as you've known it, at least for a while. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do?" Princess Charlotte looked at him with eyes that held more courage than many soldiers twice her age. "Captain, I've seen what happens when good people stay silent in the face of evil. I won't be one of those people, no matter what it costs me." James nodded, feeling a surge of pride in the young woman standing before him. "Then let's go save some lives." They slipped out of the breakfast room and made their way toward the service corridors that James knew like the back of his hand. The palace's staff areas were a maze of narrow hallways and back stairwells that connected every part of the building, designed to allow servants to move invisibly through the residence without disturbing the royal family. Today, those same passages would serve as their escape route. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, James could hear radio chatter from the security teams searching other parts of the palace. They were being methodical but not yet urgent. Clearly, they expected to find Princess Charlotte in her room and weren't prepared for the possibility that she might already be gone. They reached the service exit that led to the palace's delivery area, just as James heard the first signs of alarm in the radio communications. Someone had discovered that Princess Charlotte's room was empty. "From here, we move fast," James whispered as they approached the door. "There's a delivery truck scheduled to leave in about 3 minutes. We're going to hide in the back until we're outside the palace grounds. Then we'll figure out our next move." Princess Charlotte nodded, her face pale but determined. As James opened the door and they stepped out into the cool morning air, she grabbed his arm. "Captain," she said urgently, "the videos I recorded that night, they're stored in a cloud account that Camilla doesn't know about. Even if they catch us, the evidence still exists." James smiled grimly. The game wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. "Then we'd better make sure we stay free long enough to figure out how to use that evidence," he said. Behind them, alarms began to sound within the palace walls, but James and Princess Charlotte were already climbing into the back of a laundry truck, disappearing into the London morning with the secrets that could change everything. As the truck pulled away from Kensington Palace, Princess Charlotte took one last look at the only home she had ever known. Tomorrow, the world would wake up to discover that a member of the royal family had vanished without a trace. But somewhere in the sprawling city beyond the palace gates, a 16-year-old girl and a former royal guard would be working to expose the truth that powerful people had been willing to destroy lives to hide. The question that had started it all, what exactly did Princess Charlotte witness, had led to this moment of revolution. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in any kingdom wasn't an army at the gates, but a single person willing to ask the questions that those in power desperately wanted to remain unasked. And sometimes, the most heroic thing a soldier could do was refuse to follow orders.